Okay, here's lecture 2 from chapter 1 on talking about what economics is. And so on the first lecture we talked about scarcity, we talked about resources, we talked about the economic problem, and we talked about definition of economics. So here we're going to continue. We're going to continue talking about scarcity and then bring in new topics such as opportunity cost and different ways to allocate resources. So again, just to review, scarcity means that competing uses, and that means that if you have a resource, you have different uses for that resource, and so we have to make a choice as to how we're going to use that resource. Anytime we have a choice, that is an economic problem, and so pretty much throughout your entire life, you have been doing lots of economics since you have been making lots of choices. And any choice has both a benefit and a cost. And the benefit could be measured in money, it could be measured in units of benefit, something like that, the delicious taste of a chocolate chip cookie. And there's a cost. And so we're going to spend a little bit more time on cost because that's a concept that's a little bit more difficult. And so whenever we talk about cost in economics and in this class, we're going to be talking about opportunity cost. And the definition there is the benefits foregone from the best alternative not chosen. So essentially this is your second best choice. Your best choice, that's the one you picked, and therefore the one you don't pick, but you would have picked if your first choice wasn't picked, would be the benefits foregone from this choice. And your benefits foregone can be measured in two different ways. One is an explicit cost, and that is how normally people think of cost. But economists add an implicit cost, which normally is not thought about by many people out there in the real world. Explicit cost represents direct payments of money to another economic agent. And so if you run a business like a restaurant, your explicit cost would be paying your workers, paying your food suppliers, paying for your tables, your ovens, your refrigerators, your insurance. All those things would be your explicit cost. All the money that you're paying out. Now, a kind of cost that is normally not thought about is your implicit costs. And these represent the foregone payments of using one's own resources or one's own money. So if you use your own resource, such as your own time, there is an implicit cost. If you run this restaurant that I was talking about, you're the owner, then there's an implicit cost of your time because you could be doing something else. Instead of running the restaurant, you could be working for someone else. So one way to measure the implicit cost of your time would be the foregone salary. Another cost would be, say, using your own equipment or the building. So let's say you have the restaurant and therefore you could rent that building out to someone else, and therefore the cost of your building or other forms of capital, because a building is a form of capital. So your ovens, say you have delivery trucks, all that has an implicit cost, would be the foregone rent you could get from those assets. And then if you put money into your own business to buy that equipment, you had to take it out of, say, some other place, maybe a bank. So if you take money out of a bank to put that money into your own business to acquire capital equipment to pay your workers, therefore that money is no longer earning a return in the bank. And in the bank, they would be paying you interest. So these are not things you're paying out, these are things you are essentially saying no to. So these are things that you could have got, but you said no. Which is fine because you want to use these resources and your money in your own business. Nonetheless, that is a cost because your other choice would be to rent everything out, get a job, work for someone else, leave the money in the bank, and therefore all this is something that you could earn with choice number 2. And also you would keep all this money up here. So in other words, if you would not run the restaurant, you would not have to pay out all the money here, plus you would be able to earn all this money here. So to combine together, Your explicit cost and your implicit cost represent your opportunity cost. And so whenever we say cost in economics, we mean opportunity cost. If I just want to mean explicit cost, I would say so. We will talk about this later on when we talk about firms, businesses. And your explicit cost is also known as your accounting cost. So your accounting cost is what's done in an accounting procedure. Your economic cost is both these things together. So if you talk to an accountant, they would only include explicit cost, but economists include not just explicit cost, but also implicit cost. And so together, your opportunity cost is your cost, and that is your economic cost. And if that is hard to understand, don't worry about that. We're going to come back to this later on, and we're going to talk about this over again. Now, moving on, every society has to make decisions about how they're going to allocate their resources to decide three things: what they're going to produce, those are the goods and services that we're going to produce. So we have to decide if we're going to be making trucks or tractors or cars or growing apples or making pizzas. And then we have to decide how we're going to produce these things. Are we going to use this type of raw material or another type of raw material? Are we going to be using 5 workers or 6 workers? Or are we going to be using more capital equipment? So we have to decide again how we're going to manufacture these things with a lot of computers, more people, and so therefore quite a lot of choice there on how to manufacture things, how to produce things. And then the last one, which might be the most difficult one, is that after we produce all these nice stuff, who gets it? So essentially, who gets all this stuff? Now, economics, what we want to do is try to figure out a way for us to answer these questions in the most effective way. And again, we want to answer these 3 questions right here in such a way to maximize, again, the satisfaction of human wants. So moving along, let's talk about allocation. So allocation means deciding how we're going to allocate our resources. And then after that, who's going to get the things that we produce. And this is known as rationing. Rationing is not just when there's an emergency and the government has to give out, control the allocation of, say, bottles of water or chainsaws after a hurricane, things like that. Rationing simply means who gets what. And so things are rationed all the time because everyone cannot have everything that they want. And so there are many different ways to ration things. And so the job of economists is to try to figure out which way is the best way in terms of maximizing the satisfaction of human wants. And what I have here is a short list of different ways to allocate resources and or goods and services. And the first one is a market, and that's how we do a lot of that in our country. That's why the United States is known as a market-based economy, because we use markets to decide a lot of our rationing. Essentially, with markets, we get prices, and the prices will decide who gets these items. Consumers who are willing and able to pay the price get the item, and consumers who are not willing and are not able to buy the item don't get it. And that's how beachfront property is allocated. The people who get to live at the beach are the ones who are willing and able to pay those very high prices, and the ones who are not willing and are not able don't live at the beach. And that's how it's allocated. That's how we allocate Mercedes, that's how we allocate apples, that's how we allocate most of the things in our society. But I want to point out it's not the only way we allocate things. We can decide to allocate things on using different methods. And to be honest, this list right here, there's a little noise out there. That's okay. So this list right here, we can find examples of this throughout the U.S. economy. So lottery. A lottery is just by chance. And so we do have a California lottery. We have Powerball, things like that. And so if you put your money down and you win the lottery, or you go to Vegas and you win at gambling, then you have received more claims on our goods and services by having more money. Another way to win the lottery is to be born in the right family. And so if you are Melinda and Bill Gates' kids, you have won the lottery, I would say. You are set for life. We can allocate things based on need, and we have that at Chaffey College. We have fee waivers, we have financial aid, things like that. And so if you need to have some kind of assistance, we do have some element of that in our society. We have food stamps, we have Medicaid, which is health insurance for low-income people, and so on. We can also allocate things by what's known as a queue, which is a fancy word for first come, first serve, essentially a line. And so many times that's how we allocate things in, say, at the small level. So if you have a restaurant and it's very popular, you would have a wait list. If you want to get inside Disneyland to get on a ride, there's a line you have to wait in, things like that. Do it by tradition, how it's done in the past. This would be more like maybe a family unit, more of a simple tribal society, maybe how things are done in like community churches, things like that, again, based on what's done in the past. You can have a planning agency. This essentially is government. And we have a lot of that in our economy. So in the government, we have local government, we have state government, we have federal government, and they have a lot of say in how we allocate our resources. Government purchases resources directly. They provide goods and services. They provide national defense. They provide a lot of our education. They provide highways. They provide medical care. The VA provides medical care to veterans and soldiers. And so again, we have quite a bit of government in our system. And because we have a democracy to some degree, one can argue, then each voter has some say in how government operates. We can do it by force. We can force you to do things, mandates. Just recently we've had a lot of debate about what government can do in terms of the pandemic. And so governors have been directing stay-at-home orders, mandating the wearing of masks, things like that. We also have a selective service in the United States where we don't use it right now, but we could force people to essentially join the military, which we've done in the past, Vietnam War, for example. We can have some kind of equal or fair amount, maybe going back to need, tying into need. So maybe some kind of amount, maybe some kind of amount where people get if they're very hungry, food stamps again. Maybe give people the opportunity of a chance, things like that. And so we have, again, this element in our society as well. So the question is, which is the best way? And I cannot answer that. Economists cannot answer that just by just saying market or queue or planning. What we want to do is do a lot of, say, data collection to figure out what's the best way to allocate resources and try to allocate resources in such a way, again, which is efficient. And to be efficient, again, is doing the best job to maximize the satisfaction of our resources. So I'll stop there.